Welcome back everyone to our studies in AQA A-level history. In this lesson we're going to spend some time talking about the Brussels Conference of 1876. Now this is of course a very key and important conference, a very key and important part of our studies concerning the British Empire and international relations, specifically the relationship between other European imperial states. And the Brussels Conference is one of these first issues that develops that shows the clear interest that people have towards Africa specifically. Now, as a basic overview, the Brussels Conference was convened. It was the Brussels Geographic Conference, as its official name, was convened in 1876, and was convened by King Leopold II of Belgium, and laid the groundwork for the establishment of a number of different things, but specifically from the context of King Leopold II, it led to the groundwork for the establishment of the Congo Free State, a personal colony that existed under Leopold's control. Fundamentally, it was essentially a very important conference which ultimately was convened in September of 1876, where Leopold II invited nearly 40 prominent figures. This included explorers and scientists and philanthropists to Brussels. The ostensible aim was to discuss the exploration and the quote-unquote civilization of Central Africa, particularly the Congo Basin. However, Leopold's speech also emphasized a mission to open civilization, open to civilization, the only part of our globe not yet explored, and to pierce the darkness in which the entire populations are enveloped. So one of the ideas associated herein is this idea of civilization, of exporting civilization, almost suggesting and portraying the entire endeavor as a noble crusade. Now, at the conference's conclusion, the participants of the conference established what was known as the IAA, or the International African Association. The official title was the International Association for the Exploration and Civilization of Central Africa. Leopold was unanimously elected as the first chairman of this new international organization, despite its earlier pledge to rotate its position among members. Now, the aim for the IAA was it was envisioned as a multinational scientific and humanitarian organization with committees across various different European countries. However, the reality of the IAA was that it would soon become the vehicle for Leopold's personal ambitions, with national committees really functioning in any kind of effective setting. In terms of what the IAA ultimately did, there was some scientific explanations and explorations taking place. One of the things that it aimed to do was to conduct a comprehensive geographical and ethnographical study of Central Africa. This included mapping uncharted territories, documenting local cultures, assessing the region's natural resources for exploitation, of course. These will, of course, be prevalent and important bits of information, and such data would be crucial for establishing European claims and ultimately justifying colonial expansion. The IAA also established strategic outposts. It planned to create a network of stations along the Congo River. These outposts were intended to ultimately try and facilitate trade, but also to facilitate navigation and to spread European influence deeper and deeper into the central heart of Africa. In 1879, for example, Leopold authorized Belgian officers to establish a fortified post at Karima, which demonstrated the practical application of the strategy of navigation and facilitating outposts. So, in terms of its humanitarian justification, of course, there was this, at least on paper, desire for the international for the International African Association to be a civilizing mission, to civilize, quote unquote, the indigenous populations by introducing European education, by introducing European religion and governance. Because of its full name, the International Association for the Exploration and Civilization of Central Africa, we can see that this humanitarian, quote-unquote, humanitarian justification of civilizing the native populations was reflected in this title, in its title itself. In his address, as I've already mentioned, Leopold described the endeavor to crusade, to open the civilization, and to try and essentially to discover the only part of the globe that is not yet explored. So all of these ideas are deeply rooted in European imperial ideas, European imperial logic, which of course is going to be controversial given the fact that European colonialism is not morally justified in any meaningful sense. Another goal, though, of the IAA was, or at least another stated goal, should I say, was to combat the transatlantic slave trade. So the transatlantic slave trade had fundamentally ended, had been outlawed by various different empires up to this point, or at least was being in the process of being outlawed at various different stages at this point. But it was still nevertheless quite prevalent in other parts of Africa. And so the International African Association aimed to establish a presence that would try and disrupt the slave trade and try and promote alternative economic activities. Now, of course, the reality is that this objective often served as a convenient pretext for territorial expansion. So while there may have been, of course, an objective moral standard associated with suppressing the slave trade, there was this idea that suppressing the slave trade could be used as a moral justification that would ultimately result in territorial expansion and control of greater amounts of territory. So it was the sort of double-edged sword, fundamentally. Following the dissolution of the International African Association, Leopold continued his activities through a different committee, the Committee for Studies of the Upper Congo, which would eventually evolve into the International Association of the Congo in 1885. We see that this would continue until Leopold secures in 1885 personal sovereignty over the Congo Basin, officially naming it the Congo Free State. And so this Brussels conference that was established all the way back in 1876 really is viewed by many from the perspective of international relations as the inception of the so-called scramble for Africa, this period in which we see European powers, especially the British Empire, aggressively expand their colonial holdings in the continent. Now, while it did not directly result in any territorial claims on paper, it set the precedent for European intervention, which ultimately would see the strategic maneuverings of King Leopold II to legitimize his own personal imperial ambitions over Central Africa.